The radar screen at Bagram Airfield flickered with ghost signatures at 3:47 hours, but Senior Airman Martinez knew better than to trust the aging equipment. What caught his attention wasn't the electronic snow dancing across the green phosphor display. It was the silence. Radio silence from Hawkeye 7 had stretched beyond the acceptable 15-minute window, and in Afghanistan's volatile airspace, silence meant trouble. Colonel Catherine Razor Thorne had vanished somewhere over the Hindu Kush Mountains in her A-10 Thunderbolt II, call sign Hawkeye 7. The mission briefing had been routine. Close air support for a Special Forces team pinned down in a valley that cartographers had forgotten to name. But routine missions in Afghanistan had a way of becoming legends or obituaries, and the betting pool in the ready room had favored the latter. "She's probably crater gravel by now," Flight Commander Hayes had muttered during the morning briefing, his voice carrying the casual cruelty that passed for realism in combat zones. 41 years old, flying like she's still 25. Afghan mountains don't care about your ego. The A-10 Warthog was built to take punishment, but even the titanium bathtub cockpit had its limits. Intelligence reports suggested heavy Taliban presence in Sector 77, complete with Soviet-era surface-to-air missiles and enough small arms fire to turn the sky into a lead storm. Razor had flown into that maelstrom at 2:30 hours with her usual pre-flight ritual. 3 taps on the aircraft's nose, a silent prayer to whatever gods protected pilots, and a photograph tucked beneath her helmet padding. Martinez adjusted his headset and swept the radio frequencies one more time. "Hawkeye 7, Bagram Tower, radio check." Static answered him like white noise from the void. The mountain peaks stretched endlessly beyond the base perimeter, their snow-capped summits catching the first pale light of dawn. Somewhere in that wilderness, either Catherine Thorne was fighting for her life, or the mountains had claimed another pilot. The irony wasn't lost on anyone at Bagram. Razor had more combat hours than most of the younger pilots combined, but she'd never quite escaped the whispered doubts that followed female pilots through their careers. Too emotional, too cautious, too old. The criticism had hardened her into something sharp and unbreakable, earning her the call sign that now echoed uselessly through radio static. As Martinez reached for the emergency beacon tracker, a faint transmission crackled through the communications array. The voice was distorted, barely recognizable through interference, but unmistakably female. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Hawkeye 7. I'm alive, but I'm missing some important pieces." The greatest rescue mission in Operation Enduring Freedom was about to begin, though nobody at Bagram knew it yet. Dawn broke slowly over the peaks, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. In the distance, something moved against the mountain face, something that shouldn't have been flying but somehow was. Catherine Razor Thorne had always believed that the sky belonged to those bold enough to claim it, and this morning she intended to prove that theory one bullet hole at a time. The emergency beacon's steady pulse echoed through the communications center as ground crews scrambled to triangulate the signal. Martinez plotted coordinates with shaking hands, his mind racing through search and rescue protocols. Hawkeye 7's last known position put her deep in Taliban-controlled territory, 60 miles southeast of Bagram in terrain that helicopters approached with prayers and heavily armed escorts. Colonel Hayes burst through the operations center doors, his flight suit half-zipped and his face carrying the particular tension that came with losing pilots under his command. "What's the situation?" he demanded, though his tone suggested he already feared the answer. "Hawkeye 7 is alive, sir," Martinez reported, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Emergency beacon is active, but the transmission quality suggests significant aircraft damage. She's somewhere in Sector 77, grid reference still calculating." Hayes studied the tactical display, his jaw tightening as he processed the implications. Sector 77 was a nightmare scenario for search and rescue: steep valleys, unpredictable weather, and enough enemy activity to turn any rescue mission into a bloodbath. How the hell did she survive SAM coverage in that sector? The question hung in the air like incense in a cathedral. Every pilot at Bagram knew the statistics. Surface-to-air missiles had claimed more coalition aircraft than enemy fighters, and the Taliban's Russian-made SA-7s were unforgiving to low-flying attackers. The A-10's reputation for survivability was legendary, but legends had limits. Martinez fine-tuned the radio equipment, filtering through layers of atmospheric interference. "Sir," she mentioned missing pieces, could be referring to aircraft damage or... He left the sentence unfinished, but everyone in the room understood. In pilot parlance, missing pieces could mean anything from blown hydraulics to severed limbs. The tactical radio crackled again, Razor's voice emerging from static like a ghost materializing from fog. "Bagram Tower, Hawkeye 7. I've got good news and bad news. Good news is I'm still airborne. Bad news is I'm navigating by compass and prayers, and my bird's making sounds like a dying walrus." Hayes grabbed the microphone with the urgency of a man grasping a lifeline. "Hawkeye 7, this is Tower. What's your status? Can you reach friendly airspace?" "Tower, I've got battle damage to primary flight systems. Hydraulics are sketchy, and my left engine sounds like it's gargling gravel. But I've still got ordnance, and there's a special forces team down here that needs covering fire. I'm not heading home until they're safe." The operations center fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment. Hayes closed his eyes, recognizing the tone in Razor's voice, the particular brand of stubborn determination that separated good pilots from legends. "Negative, Hawkeye 7. RTB immediately. That's an order." "Sir, with respect, I can't comply. Badger 6 has wounded and they're surrounded. I'm the only close air support in range." Through the radio static, they could hear the distant sound of automatic weapons fire, punctuated by the occasional explosion that spoke of mortars and rocket-propelled grenades. Somewhere in those mountains, American soldiers were fighting for their lives, and Catherine Thorne was their guardian angel, damaged wings and all. The Rescue Coordination Center transformed into controlled chaos as staff officers plotted contingencies and flight crews prepped aircraft for what everyone knew would be a dangerous mission. Hayes stared at the tactical display, weighing the mathematics of war. One damaged A-10 against unknown numbers of enemy combatants, with American lives hanging in the balance. Colonel Hayes had flown combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan for 12 years, accumulating the kind of experience that turned reflexes into instincts and instincts into survival. But Catherine Thorne was writing her own playbook somewhere in those mountains, and every military manual in existence said she should be dead by now. The radio transmission strengthened as atmospheric conditions shifted with the rising sun. "Tower, Hawkeye 7. I've got visual on Badger 6's position. They're pinned down in a valley approximately 6 clicks southeast of Checkpoint Charlie. Enemy forces are positioned on the high ground. I count multiple machine gun nests and what looks like mortar positions." Martinez updated the tactical display, red symbols blooming across the digital terrain map like flowers of war. The Special Forces team's beacon showed them trapped in a narrow valley with limited escape routes, classic terrain for an ambush. "Sir," he said quietly, "if she leaves that overwatch position, Badger 6 won't last 10 minutes. Hayes understood the tactical reality, but understanding and accepting were different creatures entirely. "Hawkeye 7, what's your fuel status?" "Approximately 40 minutes of loiter time, sir. But that's assuming my fuel lines don't decide to redecorate the cockpit." The gallows humor in her voice didn't mask the underlying tension. Every pilot knew that battle damage was unpredictable. Systems that seemed functional could fail without warning, turning aircraft into falling coffins at the worst possible moment. But Razor's voice carried something else, something that Hayes had learned to recognize over years of combat leadership: absolute commitment. Tower, I'm beginning my attack run. Badger 6, this is Hawkeye 7. Keep your heads down, I'm bringing the thunder. The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon was designed to destroy Soviet tanks, but it worked equally well against fortified positions and enemy personnel. Through the radio, they could hear the distinctive sound of the 7-barrel rotary cannon, a sound that coalition forces called the BRRRT of freedom, and Taliban fighters learned to fear. Direct hit on enemy position, Razor reported, her voice steady despite the violence she was orchestrating. Badger 6, you've got a clear corridor to the northeast. I'm maintaining overwatch. The operations center tracked her movements through radio transmissions and the intermittent beacon signal. Each time she banked for another attack run, her aircraft's damaged systems protested audibly through the radio link. Metal groaned against metal, hydraulics whined under stress, and somewhere in the mechanical symphony, Catherine Thorne continued flying through sheer force of will. The first helicopter rescue attempt failed before it began. Weather conditions in the mountains had deteriorated rapidly, with cloud cover dropping to dangerous levels and wind speeds that challenged even experienced pilots. The MH-60 Blackhawk, assigned to the mission, turned back after encountering severe turbulence that nearly sent it into a ridgeline. Rescue 1, this is Tower, Hayes transmitted. What's your assessment for second attempt? Tower, Rescue 1. Weather window is closing fast. We need at least 2 hours for conditions to improve, possibly longer. 2 hours might as well have been 2 years. Razor's fuel wouldn't last that long, and Badger 6 was still taking fire despite her close air support. The mathematics of the situation were unforgiving. Without immediate extraction, everyone in that valley was going to die. Martinez monitored multiple radio frequencies simultaneously, his headset alive with traffic from various rescue coordination elements. Sir, I'm picking up increased Taliban radio chatter. They're moving reinforcements toward Badger 6's position. Hayes studied the intelligence reports flowing across his screen. Taliban forces were converging on the valley from 3 directions, apparently willing to accept heavy casualties to eliminate the trapped Americans. What had started as an unfortunate tactical situation was evolving into a full-scale battle, with one damaged A-10 as the only thing preventing a massacre. Hawkeye 7 Tower, sitrep on aircraft status. Tower, I've lost my backup hydraulic system, and my primary is showing pressure fluctuations. Navigation systems are completely dead. I'm flying by landmarks and magnetic compass. But the gun still works, and I've got plenty of ammunition. The understatement was classic Razor. A-10 pilots were famous for their attachment to the GAU-8 cannon, but few had the opportunity to prove their aircraft's lethality under such desperate circumstances. Through the radio, they could hear her engaging multiple targets, the cannon's distinctive roar punctuating her situation reports like mechanical thunder. Badger 6 has 2 wounded, she continued, but they're mobile. I'm keeping the escape route clear, but I need that extraction helicopter soonest. Hayes knew that soonest, in military parlance, usually meant sometime before everyone dies, but weather and enemy action had their own timeline. The rescue mission was becoming a race between Catherine Thorne's fuel supply, her aircraft's structural integrity, and the Taliban's reinforcement schedule. In the operations center, staff officers calculated probability matrices and risk assessments, but the numbers all pointed to the same conclusion. Hawkeye 7 was flying on borrowed time, and when that time expired, 7 American servicemen would die in an unnamed valley in Afghanistan. The second rescue attempt launched despite marginal weather conditions. 2 Blackhawk helicopters loaded with medical personnel and additional firepower. Rescue 1 and Rescue 2 fought through deteriorating visibility, their pilots navigating by instruments and prayers as they approached the combat zone. Tower, this is Rescue 1. We're encountering severe turbulence and near-zero visibility. GPS is unreliable due to terrain masking. Martinez coordinated the rescue flight's approach while monitoring Razor's increasingly desperate situation reports. Rescue 1, Hawkeye 7 is maintaining overwatch at your destination. She'll guide you in. The A-10's battle damage was becoming more pronounced with each passing minute. Hydraulic fluid leaked steadily from punctured lines, leaving a visible trail in the sky that enemy forces could track. Her left engine ran rough, occasionally backfiring with sounds that carried through the radio transmission like gunshots. Hawkeye 7, this is Rescue 1. We need your position for final approach. Rescue 1, I'm orbiting the valley at 8,000 feet. You'll see me when you see the smoke from my engines. Her attempt at humor couldn't mask the strain in her voice. Badger 6 is positioned at the valley floor, marked by orange smoke, heavy enemy activity on the ridgelines. The helicopter crews pressed forward through clouds that seemed solid enough to walk on, their rotors chopping through air thick with moisture and uncertainty. Below them, somewhere in the maze of valleys and ridgelines, Catherine Thorne continued her solitary vigil over 7 American soldiers. I've got visual on the A-10, Rescue 1 reported. Holy hell, how is that thing still flying? Even through the poor weather conditions, Razor's aircraft presented a shocking sight. The A-10's left wing showed massive battle damage, with jagged holes that spoke of exploding ordnance and heavy machine gun fire. The fuselage bore scars from shrapnel and bullets, and dark fluid streamed from multiple locations. Style points don't matter if it gets the job done, Razor replied, her voice carrying the dry humor that sustained combat pilots through impossible situations. I'm running low on hydraulic pressure, so this dance won't last much longer. Rescue 1 began its descent into the valley, threading between ridgelines while Razor provided suppressive fire against enemy positions. The GAU-8 cannon spoke repeatedly, its depleted uranium rounds chewing through Taliban fighting positions with ruthless efficiency. Badger 6, this is Rescue 1. We're 2 minutes out. Prep your wounded for immediate extraction. The extraction itself was a masterpiece of military precision choreographed by desperation and executed under fire. Rescue 1 touched down in the valley for exactly 90 seconds, while Rescue 2 provided covering fire from altitude. 7 Special Forces soldiers, 2 of them carried by their teammates, ran across open ground while Catherine Thorne turned her crippled aircraft into a flying artillery platform. All personnel loaded, Rescue 1 transmitted as it lifted off. Badger 6 is secure. The relief in Hayes' voice was audible as he keyed his microphone. Outstanding work, Rescue 1. Hawkeye 7, you are cleared to RTB immediately. But Razor's acknowledgement carried an ominous undertone. Tower, I'm not sure RTB is in the cards. My hydraulic system just failed completely, and I'm losing control authority. Engine temperature is redlining. Through the radio static, they could hear alarms blaring in her cockpit, the electronic warnings that told pilots their aircraft was dying beneath them. Every gauge was painting a picture of catastrophic failure, but somehow the A-10 remained airborne through Catherine Thorne's skill and determination. Hawkeye 7, what's your assessment for reaching friendly territory? The pause before she answered spoke volumes. Tower, I'm going to try for Bagram, but I recommend having crash and rescue standing by. This bird is coming apart around me. Hayes issued orders with the efficiency born of experience and desperation. Fire trucks rolled toward the runway, medical personnel prepped trauma equipment, and every available pilot gathered in the operations center to witness what everyone hoped wouldn't be Catherine Thorne's final flight. The journey from the combat zone to Bagram Airfield should have taken 20 minutes in a healthy A-10. For Razor, flying an aircraft held together by willpower and military-grade stubbornness, each minute stretched into an eternity of mechanical protest and electronic warnings. Tower Hawkeye 7, I've lost all hydraulic pressure. Controls are heavy and unresponsive. Altitude is 8,000 feet and descending. I can't maintain level flight. Martinez tracked her progress on the tactical display, watching the beacon signal move slowly across the digital map like a wounded animal seeking shelter. Hawkeye 7, you're 50 miles out. Can you maintain gliding flight? Negative, Tower. This isn't a glide, it's a controlled crash looking for a place to happen. The A-10 was designed to sustain battle damage and return home, but Razor's aircraft was testing the absolute limits of that philosophy. The titanium bathtub surrounding her cockpit had protected her from enemy fire, but it couldn't overcome the laws of physics. Without hydraulic pressure, the massive aircraft became increasingly difficult to control, requiring every ounce of her strength and experience. "Fuel status critical," she reported, her voice betraying the physical strain of wrestling with dead controls. "I'm running on fumes and adrenaline." Hayes coordinated the emergency response from the operations center while monitoring weather conditions around Bagram. The same mountain weather that had complicated the rescue mission now threatened to turn Razor's emergency landing into a catastrophe. "Hawkeye 7, winds are favoring runway 27. You'll have a straighten approach." "Roger, Tower, though at this point I'll take any piece of flat ground you can offer." Every pilot at Bagram understood the magnitude of what Razor was attempting. Landing a heavily damaged A-10 without hydraulic assistance required skills that weren't taught in flight school. They were learned through experience, instinct, and the kind of desperate innovation that separated survivors from statistics. The first visual contact came from the control tower, where an air traffic controller spotted smoke trails on the horizon. "I've got her," he announced, adjusting his binoculars to track the approaching aircraft. "She's low and trailing smoke from both engines." As the A-10 grew larger in the distance, the extent of its damage became apparent to everyone watching. The left wing showed massive battle damage, with sections of aluminum skin missing entirely. The fuselage bore the scars of close combat, and hydraulic fluid streamed behind the aircraft like tears. "Jesus Christ," whispered one of the young pilots watching from the operations center. "How is that thing still airborne?" Hayes keyed his microphone with steady hands despite the tension coursing through his veins. "Hawkeye 7, Tower, you are cleared for emergency landing, runway 27. Crash and rescue equipment is standing by." "Tower, this is going to be interesting," Razor replied, her voice carrying the particular calm that came with accepting whatever outcome awaited. "If I don't walk away from this landing, tell everyone that Catherine Thorne went down fighting." The approach was a testament to pilot skill overcoming mechanical failure. Without hydraulic assistance, Razor had to rely on manual reversion, using raw muscle strength to move control surfaces designed to be powered by sophisticated systems. The A-10 descended toward Bagram like a wounded eagle, too proud to surrender despite its injuries. "Airspeed looks good," the tower controller reported, tracking her final approach through powerful binoculars. "Descent rate is steep but manageable." Everyone watching held their breath as the aircraft crossed the runway threshold. The landing gear had deployed manually, but nobody knew if the systems would hold under the stress of touchdown. Razor fought to keep the aircraft aligned with the centerline, while alarms continued blaring warnings about every major system failure. The A-10 struck the runway with surprising gentleness, considering the circumstances. The main landing gear absorbed the impact as designed, but the left brake system failed immediately, causing the aircraft to veer toward the edge of the tarmac. Razor applied right rudder and differential power, using every technique she'd learned in 20 years of military flying. Crash and rescue vehicles raced alongside the slowing aircraft, their crews ready for whatever scenario awaited them. Foam trucks positioned themselves to deal with potential fuel fires, while medical personnel prepared for injury extraction. The aircraft finally rolled to a stop approximately 3,000 feet down the runway, its left main tire flat and smoking. For a moment that seemed to last forever, nothing moved except the heat waves rising from overheated engines and the steady drip of various fluids onto the tarmac. Then the canopy opened with a mechanical wheeze, and Catherine Thorne emerged from her cockpit with the deliberate movements of someone who had just cheated death through skill, luck, and uncompromising determination. The post-flight inspection of Hawkeye 7 revealed damage that should have been incompatible with continued flight. The left wing's main spar was cracked in 3 places, hydraulic lines had been severed by shrapnel, and the left engine showed signs of critical overheat. Most remarkably, a piece of Taliban mortar shrapnel had penetrated the cockpit area, stopping just inches from Razor's helmet. "Ma'am," the crew chief said as he cataloged the damage, "I've never seen an A-10 take this kind of punishment and still make it home. This aircraft should be in pieces scattered across Afghanistan." Razor ran her hands along the scarred fuselage, her fingers tracing bullet holes and shrapnel scars like a mother checking injuries on a wounded child. "She brought me home when she had every right to quit," she said quietly. "That's what warthogs do, they get ugly, but they get the job done." Colonel Hayes approached with the peculiar expression of a commander whose assumptions had just been violently readjusted. Throughout his career, he'd been skeptical of older pilots, particularly those who insisted on flying beyond what he considered their prime. Catherine Thorne had just provided a master class in why experience sometimes mattered more than youth. "Outstanding work, Colonel," he said, his voice carrying newfound respect. "That was some of the finest flying I've ever witnessed." The recognition felt different from the standard military congratulations that followed successful missions. Hayes wasn't just acknowledging her technical skill. He was admitting that his preconceptions about age and gender in combat aviation had been thoroughly demolished by her performance. "Sir, I was just doing my job," Razor replied, though she couldn't entirely suppress the satisfaction in her voice. "Badger 6 needed cover, and I was the only game in town." The debriefing session later that evening drew pilots from across the base, all eager to hear details of the mission that would become legend. Razor described her tactics with the clinical precision that characterized professional military aviators, but her audience heard something deeper, the voice of someone who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious through skill and courage. "When the hydraulics failed," she explained to the assembled pilots, "I had maybe 30 seconds to decide whether to eject or try to bring her home. Ejecting over Taliban-controlled territory seemed like a poor career move, so I chose to ride it out." The younger pilots hung on every word, recognizing that they were receiving instruction from someone who had just joined the ranks of aviators whose exploits would be discussed for decades. The mission had transformed Catherine Thorne from a competent but unremarkable pilot into something approaching legend. But the real transformation had occurred in the attitudes of her colleagues. The whispered doubts about her age and competence had been replaced by genuine admiration for her skill and courage. Flight Commander Hayes, who had questioned her capabilities that morning, now found himself reevaluating every assumption he'd held about combat aviation and the pilots who mastered it. The photograph Catherine had carried in her helmet during the mission was discovered tucked beneath her seat cushion after the landing. It showed a younger version of herself standing beside her first A-10, fresh from pilot training with the confident smile of someone who believed she could conquer the sky. 20 years later, scarred by combat and seasoned by experience, she had proven that some dreams were worth defending regardless of the cost. The sky had indeed belonged to those bold enough to claim it, and Catherine Thorne had staked her claim with blood, sweat, and 30,000 feet of Afghan airspace. The maintenance report on Hawkeye 7 filled 17 pages with detailed descriptions of battle damage, system failures, and structural compromises. The aircraft would never fly again. The damage was too extensive for economical repair. But its final mission had saved 7 American lives and demonstrated the A-10's legendary toughness under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. As night fell over Bagram Airfield, Catherine Thorne sat in the pilot's lounge, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Through the windows, she could see the lights of aircraft preparing for night missions, continuing the endless cycle of combat operations that defined military aviation in Afghanistan. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities for pilots to prove themselves under fire. But tonight belonged to reflection and the quiet satisfaction that came with surviving the impossible. In a career filled with routine flights and forgotten sorties, the mission that everyone had expected to be her last had instead become her finest hour. The citation for her Distinguished Flying Cross would eventually describe her actions in the clinical language that military awards required: extraordinary heroism while participating in aerial flight. But the pilots who had witnessed her performance understood that words, no matter how carefully chosen, could never fully capture what Catherine Thorne had accomplished in the skies over Afghanistan. She had proven that experience mattered, that skill could overcome impossible odds, and that the right pilot in the right aircraft could still change the outcome of battles through courage and determination. In an age of high-technology warfare and remote-controlled weapons, one woman had demonstrated that the human element remained irreplaceable. The sky belonged to those bold enough to claim it, and Catherine Thorne had written her name across the Afghan heavens in smoke trails and cannon fire, creating a legend that would inspire military aviators for generations to come. Her damaged A-10 might never fly again, but her story had just begun its journey into immortality.